And we're going to talk about boundaries, setting healthy boundaries, how to do it, and why we may struggle with setting healthy boundaries. What is a boundary, you may ask? So I think a lot of times when we think of boundary setting, we think of where maybe our physical boundaries might be crossed, where somebody's maybe touching us inappropriately or being really inappropriate with us, where somebody else is doing something to us. But boundary setting can actually be a two-way street where we can cross our own boundaries with ourselves, even where we're not standing up for ourselves and our own mental and emotional well-being, or where we're letting somebody else cross our boundaries, whether that's emotionally or unemotionally, like even having, for example, a partner who's pulling away, like that's a form of crossing a boundary because it's affecting your emotional health and wellness. So I'm going to get into the different ways that boundaries can be crossed, and remember that this is different for everybody. So boundary setting is probably the number one thing I get asked. What is a boundary? How do we set healthy boundaries? How do I know when to set a healthy boundary? So number one, what is a boundary or what are boundaries? So boundaries are basically the line that separates yourself from others or yourself from the rest of the world. It's your personal expectations and values for how you want others to treat you or how you want to treat others in turn. So you can take a look at boundaries like that line of how you want others to treat you, how you want to treat yourself, how you expect to be treated, and how you expect to treat others and how others will see you in the world. So boundaries separate our sense of self from other people, and they tell other people how to treat us. So often people will struggle with setting boundaries where they maybe grew up in an invalidating household, such as with parents who may have said, don't worry about it, you're overreacting. And oftentimes, this has happened to a lot of us in childhood. Our parents will say something like, you know, you're being over emotional. And this has happened to a lot of us, I feel. But what it happens when that happens in childhood, what happens to us is we take away a belief system now that how I feel about something isn't valid. And what happens from that is then we take away a belief of I can't trust myself and my emotions. And then we start to doubt ourselves. So, for example, we might be in a relationship and our partner might say something hurtful to us, or they might do something that we perceive as hurtful. And instead of communicating how that action or those words made us feel, we might start to doubt or second guess ourselves. Where we might say, you might think, well, maybe I'm overreacting. We might ask a bunch of different people for their opinions. We might Google it because at the end of the day, we're not trusting our own internal compass that in some way, shape, or form, this made us feel uncomfortable. So this is what boundaries is. On a very base level, it's assessing your personal feelings and your personal emotions and what's crossing the line for you. So boundaries, there's no point asking somebody else what's a healthy boundary because everybody's boundaries are different. You see? Everybody's emotional experience is completely different. And yours is too. It has everything to do with where you feel uncomfortable in situations. So, for example, we'll go back to a romantic relationship. If you're in a romantic relationship and let's say your partner looks at other women, for example, we have a group of women, so I'm going to use that as our example right now. Let's say your partner's looking at other women and you're not actually bothered by that. Maybe you feel you should, but you're not actually bothered by it. And when you talk to your friends, they say, oh, really? He did that? That should bother you. You should say something. That's inappropriate. So, see, now here we've actually done two things. We've crossed our own boundary and we're allowing other people to influence what's an appropriate boundary for us. And it goes all the way down to that self-trust. Are we trusting what's right for us? Are we trusting what feels good for us? Are we trusting what makes us feel happy? So it's different for everybody. I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward, talking a bit more about boundaries. So again, you will struggle with boundaries most likely if you grew up in an environment where you're being invalidated, or if you grew up in an environment where you're particularly enmeshed by your caregivers. That's usually where the caregivers are saying, um, they don't see a line between you and them. They look at you like, well, you're my child. I tell you what to do. You listen. Versus them understanding that you are a separate individual with your own separate interests and your own separate opinions and your own separate beliefs and your own separate feelings. I grew up in a mesh household, and this was boundaries, particularly, was something I struggled with for a really long time. So, for example, I remember I worked in a bar when I was 18, and I would get a lot of older men. Just maybe they would make jokes. They wouldn't touch, or maybe they would just make a little joke or say something slightly inappropriate, just enough to make me uncomfortable, but not enough for me to call them out without feeling like I was overreacting in some way. But it made me uncomfortable. And instead of me saying something to them, or instead of me communicating how their words made me feel and what I expected from them, I would often just, give a nervous laugh, laugh it off, ha ha ha, and kind of walk away and avoid the whole issue. But what happens when we don't set healthy boundaries for ourselves is we're actually letting ourselves down. We're not standing up for ourselves. And we end up crossing a line on our own personal boundaries there too, because now we might as well be turning on ourselves, throwing stones. This happens anytime we get upset or frustrated with ourselves for being upset and frustrated. We're turning, a stone, we're throwing stones at ourselves, and we are crossing our own boundaries, are in our own emotional boundaries. So when we start to communicate with others how something made us feel and what we expect instead, we start standing up for ourselves. We start feeling more proud of ourselves. We start commanding respect from other people, and we start expecting that same thing from other people too. Boundaries are one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself and others. Not only will you start to respect other people's boundaries, you'll start to be a better parent respecting your child's boundaries, but you will also start to become more respectful of yourself because you're standing up for yourself. And this is how you get to know yourself, because it's all about acknowledging how we're feeling, how certain circumstances make us feel. We have to be in tune to our emotions each and every day and each and every moment, and connect to what our truth is in that situation so we can communicate that, or so that we can set a healthy boundary with ourselves and we stand up for ourselves. And it's not from this aggressive protection way. It's more in a way of saying, that's inappropriate. I don't appreciate that behavior. I expect blah, blah, blah. Without forcing anything on anyone, you're just sharing how that made you feel and what you expect in return, or what you believe is an appropriate form of communication or an appropriate form of action from somebody else. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can cross our own boundaries. Maybe you get invited to an event with a friend, or maybe a friend is taking a new workout class and you feel obligated to join them, but you don't really want to join, and it's not something you're particularly interested in, but you join anyways, and then you get kind of resentful, and now you're hating life because you have to go join this class that you never wanted to do. There we've just crossed a boundary because we didn't listen to ourselves. So we're not sticking up for ourselves. Maybe we've been invited to a party and we're exhausted, and we really just need that self-love time, or that R&R, rest and relaxation. but we push ourselves to go out and then we end up feeling really upset or not having a great time. That's a perfect example of how we've just crossed a boundary with ourselves because we're not listening and acknowledging our feelings in the moment. So this happens, it's very, very common, and it mainly happens because at some point in childhood we were taught that how we felt wasn't acceptable. And that in order, if we wanted to fit into the family unit or society, if we wanted to be loved, then we would have to kind of adapt our behavior so that it was acceptable. So this stems actually all the way back to rejection fears. So there's a ton of other examples about boundary setting. I don't think I'm going to get into too many more because I think you get the general idea. If you're feeling like it's wrong for you, it's wrong for you, and that's a clear indication of where we need to set a boundary, either with ourselves or other people. So this stems back right to rejection fears. And how do rejection fears impact us on a big level? I would have to say that rejection fears have to be the biggest one because they go right back to our primal animalistic fears of not feeling accepted or they're really fears of not being accepted or being rejected by the herd. And that goes right back to our animal nature that if we aren't accepted, if we aren't loved, then we're rejected. And if we're rejected, then we're at danger of dying. Is the subconscious belief system at play there. Now, the problem with having these fears, and I would say the majority of us have these fears blocking us in some way, shape, or form. The problem with these fears is when it comes to setting a boundary, it's so crucial and important that you're able to listen to your feelings and acknowledge your truth in that situation so that you can communicate that truth to somebody else. But here's the big problem. Many times we aren't able to communicate from a place of truth because we don't know or we aren't able to access our truth in that situation because we're being blocked by our fears or by our rejection fears. So if one of our biggest fears is a fear of, well, what if they won't accept me, or what if somebody leaves me, or what if I put up this boundary with my friend and they're not happy and they don't want to be my friend anymore? What if I say this to my parent and now I've let them down? What if I say this to my partner and he doesn't agree and he leaves me? These rejection fears prevent us from accessing our truth in a situation. And so it's crucial that we not only start to communicate from a place of truth and by listening to our feelings in every moment, but it's also essential that we start to clear up and discover how to clear up these fears so that we can access our truth, we can access what's actually bothering us in this situation so that we can communicate that clearly to somebody else. And then this starts to show us, even to ourselves, it starts to help us discover who we are, what's important to us. We become empowered now because we're communicating from a place of truth. We're now connecting with people on a deeper, more meaningful level. We're being real. And we start to get to know who we are. We start to build a happier life for ourselves because we're proud of ourselves. We're standing up for ourselves. We're shaping who we are and how we want to show up in the world and what's important to us. Boundaries are essential if you want to start creating a happier, healthier life for yourself with deeper, more meaningful connections with yourself and others, and also to help you understand your authentic self. First, we need to clear up those fears that are blocking you from accessing that truth and preventing you from communicating on that deep level. Now, communicating the right way is also super important. Often, if we don't communicate from a place of acceptance for somebody else, they're going to automatically feel rejected and their walls tend to go up. And they're not even listening at that point to what we're saying. So I do have a very powerful script for anybody watching. If you found this video valuable or if you have any questions, maybe that I don't know if you felt comfortable or not with the group, but you can even email me the questions or at admin@coachcarissa.com and I will be happy to respond, or DM me your email and say that you want to have the validation and boundary setting script. I will send this script. So you just want to write your email, DM me or write your email below. I'll send you this validation script and you can start to use it immediately to communicate, your truth in any situation.